All right. Well, again, good evening, everybody, and appreciate being able to spend this time with you and look together at just continuing to improve our skills and being able to understand the scriptures. And we're going to continue today from where we left off last week, and that is looking at some of the fundamentals for what we're calling block diagramming. And remember, block diagramming is a way to see the passage. In fact, I think last week, let me see if I can find this example. Here it is. Here's where we're trying to land. This is our goal. I think I went through this with you last week as an example of the diagram and how the diagram can help us to see the outline of a passage. And so here, this is the Great Commission that Jesus gave in Matthew 28. And as you can see, I've broken it down into, you remember last few sessions, we've talked about phrases and clauses. And again, a clause is a group of words that has a subject and a verb, and a phrase does not have both a subject and a verb. And why we're spending time doing that is because we're trying to get to a place where we can diagram the passage by breaking down all the phrases and clauses and then finding out where each phrase and clause fits within the passage. And so, for example, all authority has been given to me. That's a main clause, a independent clause. Remember, it stands alone. And then these two phrases, in heaven and on earth, modify this clause, and they specifically modify the verb where the authority has been given. And then a second independent clause, make disciples of all the nations. And then Jesus tells us how to do that. By one, baptizing, and then secondly, by teaching. Those are simply the process of conversion and salvation and sanctification. And then the third independent clause, notice they're connected together with this conjunction and, which we're going to talk about this tonight. There's a third independent clause, I am with you, and then the modifying phrases to that. And so here we can see, by understanding what the independent clauses are, those are the main ideas. And Jesus gives us three main ideas or thoughts within this paragraph. And so each of those main ideas form one of the points. So again, all authority has been given to me. That's his declaration. He makes a statement at the beginning describing his authority. And then based on that authority, the second thing he says of importance is his command to make disciples. And then by understanding the diagram and seeing how these things connect, there are two ways to make disciples: by baptizing and teaching. And then there's a third main idea that Jesus gives in the Great Commission, and that is his promise. And so here we can just see, by understanding how this diagram works and by seeing how what Jesus focuses his attention on, we can then identify from that sort of the outline of the passage. And of course, that will allow us to more clearly and accurately communicate that passage when we teach it. All right. So I just wanted to show this to you again. This is where we're headed. And so this is why we'll be going over some grammatical principles, just in order to help us be able to, one, identify phrases and clauses, and then two, figure out how they connect within the paragraph. Okay. So I'm just trying to give that sort of as a motivation, because we're going to have a lot of grammar type discussions. We're going to look at specific things, but those are important because those give us the building blocks to be able to put this diagram together. Okay. Are there any questions on this? You guys have anything you wanted to ask before we move on? Again, this I showed last week, but I wanted to review it quickly just to hopefully help you see the power of doing this diagram. And for epistles in particular, or any instructional text, diagramming is very, very helpful. Okay, any questions?
Pastor Tim, I noticed you've been using Microsoft Word to do this diagramming. Are there any other ways that you would suggest for people to diagram as well? Like, of course, paper and pen it works too, right? But
yeah, that's actually a really good question. I typically use paper and pen, but because that way, if you need to erase or do anything, you can, and it's kind of nice to be able to write it out. But obviously, in the technology age, we're moving away from that. So I use Microsoft Word and just set up the format as far as the tabs and things. There's actually a really good online software called Bible Arc. I'll spell it for you here. If you go to BibleArc.com, you can, they call it phrasing there, and there's some different options. I can, in fact, I try to find a video on that. They have a video series that they use for instructing, but basically you can use that as a tool to do the same thing, and it's free. It's free to use outside the United States. I don't use it primarily for a couple of reasons. One, it costs me money and to use it in the US. And so I don't really, to me, I just deal with Microsoft Word, but also too, you need to have a Wi-Fi connection because all the stuff that you do is online. So you can make these diagrams and there's a lot of other tools on this website. So I would encourage you to check it out. And there's a few other guys from the Expositors Academy that use it. And if you are interested, I can try to get some of their training materials for you on that. But it's BibleArc.com. That's one way. Some of the Bible software tools now, like Logos, actually have a diagramming package or diagramming application within the Bible software package. Again, I know for Logos, I don't know for the other ones. For me, Microsoft Word is the simplest. It's a little bit clunky to use, but I've gotten used to it and it works for me. But those are some of the ones. I think Bible Arc's probably the most popular, and you might find the most helpful as far as an online resource. And maybe what I can do is one day show you guys as we get further along. I can show you that software as well. But you're of course welcome to check it out on your own. And they have some training videos that kind of talk about. They call it phrasing and how to do it. It's a little bit different than what we're doing here, but the principle is very similar. It's breaking down the passage to be able to see all the connections, and so you might find it helpful. Okay. Joshua, I don't know, are you aware of any other ways to do diagramming?
Nope. Yeah, I have looked at the Bible Arc before, and yeah, it's quite good.
Yeah.
Maybe
in the next a future session, I'll spend a little time to show you what some of the things on it. Okay. So as we're focusing our attention on diagramming the passage, let's just review what we covered the last couple of weeks. That is, again, every sentence will always contain at least one independent clause. And usually a sentence will have another phrases and dependent clauses as a part of it. Now, again, let's remind ourselves a phrase is a group of words that are linked together that do not have both a subject and a verb. And phrases always modify. They always modify something else in the sentence. Okay. Now, a clause is different in that a clause does have a subject and a verb, and then sometimes an object or predicate, adjective, or noun. And there are two kinds of clauses that we looked at. We did that exercise last week together. One is an independent clause. That is a subject and a verb that stands alone. It's a complete thought. So again, from Matthew 28, all authority has been given to me. That's a complete thought. Now, if it had just said all authority has been given to me, or if just said all authority, that's not a complete thought. That's not even a clause because there's no verb. But all authority has been given to me is a complete thought. And then added to that thought, Jesus said, in heaven and on earth. Okay, so he added to the independent clause those two phrases. All right. Now, a dependent clause has a subject and verb. That's what makes it a clause, but it doesn't stand alone. It doesn't stand by itself. Okay, so for example, we might say, he kicked the ball. That stands by itself. All right, that's a complete thought. We have a subject, he, we have the verb kicked. Now, if I had said he kicked the ball, which was flat, okay, which was flat is a clause because which is a subject, was is the verb, okay, but it's not a complete thought. If we just had this dependent clause, which was flat by itself, it doesn't present a complete thought because we aren't, what does the which refer to? It can't stand by itself. We need to have this independent clause with it in order to complete the idea being expressed. And so a dependent clause, again, it has a subject and a verb, but doesn't stand by itself. And this is important, and you'll see this later. So therefore, it modifies another word in the sentence. All right? So a dependent clause is similar to a phrase in that both of them are modifiers. Both of them are linked somewhere to some other word in the sentence. Just like here, he kicked the ball, which is a word that tells us that this dependent clause, which was flat, tells us that this is linked to something else in the sentence. And as we think about it, we identify, oh, it is the ball being described. So it modifies ball. And so in a diagram, I'll put it right under ball. Okay? That tells me visually this dependent clause is linked to the ball. It's telling me something about the ball. In this case, we might say, well, what kind? Or it's describing the ball. All right, so again, let me show you this example again. So notice this is what we have here. All authority, that's my subject, has been given. That's my verb. And then in heaven and on earth are two phrases. Both of them modify has been given, describing where. Okay? And we could go down even further. I am with you. Again, a complete thought Jesus expresses here. So that's an independent clause. And then he describes, he gives two phrases attached to that. Always, that's when he is with us. And then even to the end of the age, that's another, in this case, phrase. Again, notice there's no verb here. So it's a phrase and it modifies am. It's describing when I am with you. All right. And so that is the, we in looking at this, then we identify each of these phrases and clauses and then determine how they fit within the sentence by identifying what word they modify and how they modify that word. And that's why I have in these brackets are describing how that particular phrase or clause is modifying the word. Okay? So for example, in heaven, on earth, those are locations describing where an action has taken place. And then below here, baptizing them and teaching them. And we'll talk about, those are called participles. We'll discuss those later. But in this case, these participle phrases are describing how to make disciples. That's the nature of how this word, a participle, works. Okay? I am with you. Always, that's telling us when. And then even to the end of the age, again, that's telling us when. And those are going to describe an action or a state of being. Okay, so going back to my other notes here. Okay, we'll get there. Where'd they go? There we go. Okay, so just again, by way of review, looking at phrases and clauses and what they mean and how they connect. All right, so what we're looking for is an independent clause. That's a complete thought. And then we identify the additional phrases and dependent clauses, and then just determine how they connect to the sentence. Okay, so for example, going back to our beloved letter of Philemon that we've been looking at, notice here I've highlighted each phrase and clause just to visually you can see it a little better. But notice Paul begins in verse 4 with, I thank my God. That's an independent clause. It stands alone. There's a subject and a verb, and in this case, an object, God, and it stands by itself. It's followed by another clause. Notice a clause that has a subject the subject I, and then the verb remember, and then you is the object in this case. And so notice it is a clause. It meets that definition, but it's dependent. And how do I know that? That little word when. That's telling me this is linked or connected to some other word in the sentence. In this case, connected to the verb thank. When I thank my God. All right, then we have another group of words. It's a phrase. There's no verb within here. And so it's a phrase that modifies thank as well. And then we again have another clause. Because I, subject, here, verb, and then of your love, hereof is the verb, love is the object. And actually, in this case, faith is an object as well. Two objects for the same clause there. But notice it's not independent, it is dependent. That word because tells us that. All right, it tells us it's connected to something else in the sentence. So I hear of your love doesn't stand alone in this particular paragraph because of the word because. Okay? And then we have another three phrases which follow that. So this Philemon, 4 and 5 follows this sentence definition basically, which is an independent clause with additional phrases and dependent clauses. And we see that example here for Philemon, okay? All right, now, hopefully this is just review. We've talked about this before, but I wanted to bring us to the point where we left off last week, and that is this. How then do we identify these phrases and clauses? All right, I note here, I've highlighted each phrase, each clause we've talked about, but the question, well, how do we know that that makes up a phrase? How do we know that makes up a clause? Why can't I say when I remember you in my prayers is a clause? Why did I cut it off at you and then have in my prayers separate? All right. Or how do I know that I thank my God always when I remember you? How do I know that's two separate clauses instead of one? All right. That's the question. Well, here's the answer. Each phrase and clause is identified by what I call a connector word. I don't know the more proper technical grammatical term for these, but I just call them connector words because that's essentially what they do. It's a word that introduces a phrase or a clause and connects that phrase or clause to something else in the sentence. These connector words are extremely important in understanding how a sentence fits together. And so you might think of it this way, an independent clause, this is, again, a sentence. Let me try it this way. There. All right. A sentence is an independent clause and then other dependent clauses or phrases. And those are all connected by these connector words. They're all linked into the sentence through these connector words. So let me show you that from our example in Philemon. The one we just looked at a moment ago, Philemon 4 and 5. Notice what I've done here now is highlight the connector words in this sentence that shows us, identifies to us each phrase and clause. So for example, the sentence begins with, I thank my God always, and then notice the dependent clause, I remember you, is connected with this word when. That's a connector word. All right, and that connector word tells us two things. One, it identifies to us that we now have another clause. Okay, it tells us I have another clause here, and also that connector word tells us how that clause is linked to or connected to the sentence. For example, then, let me just take these two clauses here. All right, let's say we had this. Let's say we had, I thank my God always, and then I remember you. No connector word between them. All right, this would in English carry the idea of two independent clauses. Okay, they're two statements being made. But because if we add the word when, what that tells us is this particular clause is dependent upon a word that comes before it, in this case, thank, because of the nature of that word, that connector word, when. That connector word, when, is identifying a time, right? And so it is linked to this verb, thank, telling us when. Paul's saying, when I thank my God is when I remember you. Okay? So that connector word not only identifies that this is a dependent clause, I remember you, it also, that connector word tells us how that dependent clause functions within the sentence. All right? And so each of these phrases and clauses are introduced, notice, by a connector word. All right? The connector word here is when. Then we have in the next phrase, I know it's a phrase because it's introduced by a connector word. And I know where the phrase ends because of the next connector word. You see that? So I know that in my prayers is the phrase that it's together. I highlighted it with this color blue, and it's by itself because there's another connector word after it, because. So these connector words sort of function in two ways. They act like, I don't know if, like, with when you put bricks together to make a wall, and in between the bricks you put mortar, right? And the mortar does two things, actually. The mortar shows us where each brick is and connects each brick together. And these connector words are like that. They connect a phrase or clause to the sentence, but they also show us what each phrase and clause is. So again, I know that when I remember you is a clause by itself because that word in tells me I have another phrase that follows it. So it's like the mortar. When and in bracket the dependent clause, I remember you. And so we can go through each group of words here and notice the connector word introduces the phrase or clause, but it also tells us when the next phrase or clause begins. All right? So then we have and of the faith, another connector word, that you have toward the Lord Jesus and for all the saints. So these connector words are very important and helpful because they show us where each phrase or clause begins and ends. Okay? Any questions on this, guys? This is an important principle we need to understand. Again, there may be a better term for these connector words. I don't know, but that's what I call them because that helps remind me what they're actually doing here. They're connecting. They're linking. Maybe we call them linking words too. That might be another expression. Okay. But what's going to happen is when I look for these connector words, then what I'm able to do is those help me find the phrases and clauses. And then what I do is break up my sentence that way. So here, let's do that. So I'll just show you how this leads us to the diagram. All right. So we figured out, like I said, I've already identified the connector words. I'll just leave them up above here so you can see them. And then what I do next is I break up each of these phrases and clauses into separate lines. All right. I break them right at the connector word because that's introducing the next phrase or clause. And then what I do is ask myself, okay, how do each of these phrases or clauses fit? What are they doing in the sentence? What are they modifying? We've already talked about this one. It's telling us when I thank my God. And then we have this in my prayers. That's when I remember. Okay, that's modifying remember. It's describing when or where I remember you. And then because is modifies thank as well. It's describing, here, I'll leave it on the same. The reason why I thank my God. End of the faith is connected to of your love. It's a second thing that Paul says that he heard of them. So I put it here. So here I link of your love and of the faith. Those are two things Paul says I hear of. I hear of your love and I hear of the faith. So really, we could say two reasons why I thank my God. These are linked together. And that you have is describing their love and faith. Which love and faith? Okay, the love and faith that you have. And again, toward the Lord Jesus is where they have it, so to speak, where it's directed. And then finally, and for all the saints. Now, where does that go? It's describing the faith and the love that you have towards the Lord Jesus. And then there's a second way that it's directed. For all the saints. Okay, and I might link it this way just to make it clear. Okay, so that's why as you understand and identify these connector words, then you can identify then each phrase and clause. And then the next step, and this is what we'll learn how to do together. That next step is then seeing where it fits within the paragraph. And so what I have here now is I can see, I thank my God. That's the main thought. That's the main idea. And then there's two here clauses that are connected to it that modify it. When I thank and why I thank my God. All right. And then the rest of these are modifying both of those dependent clauses. Okay. So that's really the process that we're going to learn here in diagramming is one, identify the independent clause. That's the first step. All right. And that's usually near the beginning of a paragraph. Then the second step is look for the connector words because those will tell us the other phrases and clauses in the sentence. And then the third step is to then identify how those phrases and clauses are modifying and the word that they modify in the sentence. And then we line them up underneath that word they modify, and that gives us our diagram. That gives us the visual expression of the text that we're studying. Okay? All right, any questions? Make sense? I hope. Joshua, you have anything?
So if you were to teach this passage, what title or what is the topic of your teaching?
Yeah, I would teach verses 4 to 7 make up the whole paragraph, the whole unit of thought. Let's see. And that is down here. So I wouldn't just have verses 4 and 5. I'd also include verses 6 and 7. That's part of one unit of thought that we identified in the third step when we looked at the contextual flow, the literary context, and we summarized each paragraph. And so I would take verses 4 to 7 because that's one unit of thought. And in 4 to 7, he has two independent clauses. He has, I thank my God always, and then he has, I pray, sharing your faith may become effective. So I would have 2 points in the paragraph. Now, if I'm looking at the first point, which is in verses 4 and 5, let me take you back there. Here. So this would be my first point. Or Paul's first point, Paul's thankful prayer. That's what I would call it. And in this prayer really gives the reason for his prayer, and then the next main point gives the content of his prayer. All right. Because technically he says, I thank my God when I remember you in my prayers. So that's when he expresses this gratitude as he's praying for them. And then the reason that he prays for them is because of their testimony. And then in verses 6 and 7, it contains the content of his prayer, and pray that your faith may become effective. And so those would be I would preach that. If I were preaching this passage, I would preach those together. Paul's thankful prayer. And I would make, this is just his outline. I would, of course, modify it for the sermon, but the content, Paul's. Something like that. Does that make sense?
Yep. It's good.
Okay. So what the diagram does is it just sort of guides us in this process and helps us to, I guess, clarify, to see kind of what the author's focusing on, and then helps us to identify how everything fits together. All right, because, and I'll show this to you in a little bit, we want to make sure we give attention and focus to what the author focuses on. Sometimes people might just take one word or phrase, like they might just see the word prayer here in verse 4, and then launch into this whole sermon on prayer. And, talk about the importance of prayer and that God hears our prayers and we should be praying all the time and praying fervently. And all of those things are true. And all of those are correct ideas about prayer. But that's not what Paul's focusing on here in his prayer. He's telling us something specific about why he's praying in these two particular verses. And then in the next paragraph, what he is praying. He's not giving us here principles of prayer. You can go to other passages. Go to, Jesus has a couple of great texts on prayer, principles of prayer. But that's not what Paul's focusing on here. Here he is simply just saying, telling them that he's praying for them, and he's telling them his gratitude towards them and why he prays for them. And then, like I said, verses 6 and 7 are what he prays for them. So we just want to make sure we match with the focus of the author. And yes, he mentions prayer here. And yes, prayer is a key idea within the paragraph, but what's important and what Paul's emphasizing is why he prays and what he prays in the paragraph in verses 4 to 7. That's what we want to focus on. Not make this a sermon on the 6 principles of godly prayer. That's not the focus here that Paul's giving. Okay? So let's talk about then, what are the types of connector words? All right, there are different kinds of connector words. All of them share the same characteristic or function of introducing a phrase or a clause. I probably should say identifying and introducing a phrase or a clause. But there are different kinds of connector words in English and in Greek, by the way. Greek and English grammar are similar in this regard. There are connector words in Greek, just as there are in English, and they share very similar characteristics. So everything that we're going to be learning here, even though we're focusing on English, the same grammatical principles pretty much apply to Greek as well, and Hebrew, but especially Greek. Now in English and in Greek, there are 4 kinds of connector words. All right? There are 4 kinds: conjunctions, prepositions, relative pronouns, participles. And yes, I can hear the cries of agony with these grammar terms, and more grammar's coming. But we need to cover these things. But these are each kind of connector word that we're going to encounter as we study a particular passage in English. Now, if you're looking here and counting, you say, wait a minute, you said 4 connector words. You show 5 things here. Well, the last one is punctuation. That's not a connector word, but sometimes the translation will give us punctuation, comma, period, semicolon. Those can be helpful as well to see where the phrases and clauses are in the sentence, to identify them. So technically we have 4 connector words that are used, and then punctuation marks can also be a helpful guide in identifying phrases and clauses. All right. So what we're going to do, what my plan is to take a few sessions and look at each of these connector words. All right. And help you get familiar with them, what they are and how they work. All right. Because again, while each connector word shares the same function as far as linking a phrase or clause within the sentence, the way they do that is different. Conjunctions have a different function than prepositions, which have a different function than relative pronouns or participles, all right? But each of these 4 connector words all share the same general function of connecting a phrase or clause in the sentence to another word in the sentence, okay? So today, we're going to focus our attention on the conjunctions. All right, and we'll talk a little bit about those, how to spot them, and what they do. All right, but again, I want to make sure not to get ahead of myself here, and if there are any questions that you guys have before we do that, we're going to dive into conjunctions in a minute, but before we do that, are we together here? Anyone have a question? All right. So that means you know everything or you're bored. So either way, I'm going to keep going. Conjunctions. In America, we used to, when I was growing up, they had these cartoons called, what were those called? Oh, I forgot. Oh man, I forget. But they basically were these cartoons that were made up. I'll have to show one next week. And they were these little song things to try to get kids to learn grammar and make it fun. So there was this one on conjunctions. Conjunction, junction, what's your function? I still remember that little song that they did. But conjunctions are, again, words that join. and they can join phrases, words, or clauses together in a particular way. And there's two kinds of conjunctions. Okay, again, conjunction is a connector word, but there are two types of conjunctions that we need to be aware of, all right? Because they function a little bit differently. We have what are called coordinating conjunctions, and those join two parts of a sentence that are grammatically equal. I'll show you some examples in a minute. And subordinating conjunctions. Those join a dependent clause to another word in the sentence. All right? Again, both are connecting words, both are conjunctions, but they each have a different way they work, okay, grammatically. There's coordinating and subordinating. All right, so let's take a look at each of those. A coordinating conjunction joins together parts of a sentence that are grammatically equal. This is very important. You guys see this. All right, they're grammatically equal. It takes two words or two or more words, phrases or clauses, and connects them together. Coordinate has that idea. It means to bring together. It carries the idea of two things that are equal in importance or rank. All right, so a coordinating conjunction joins those together. So here's an example. I walked to the store and, that's my coordinating conjunction, I bought some bread. Notice that conjunction and joins two independent clauses. I walked to the store is one thought. I bought some bread is another thought. And this conjunction and is connecting those two independent clauses together. All right, they're grammatically equal. All right, both are independent clauses and both are of equal importance in this particular sentence. Okay, so that's one example. All right, I'll do one more, and then I'm gonna call on you guys to assist because I'm talking too much here. Okay, so another example of a coordinating conjunction is that word or. And in this sentence, it is connecting to the right or to the left. And this is how it would look like on a diagram. It joins, in this case, two phrases. Okay, the last example joined two independent clauses, that word and. In this example, it's do not turn. Okay, that's the subject and verb. You do not turn. And then there's two phrases here, to the right or to the left. Where? It's describing where not to turn. And the or is connecting. Again, these are two grammatically equal. Both of them are phrases. Both of them are parallel statements. All right? And they're connected by or. That word or means two different options. The word and means two that go together. Or identifies two different options. Okay? Now, as we look at this one, let me ask Joshua. I'll start with you. What is the conjunction here, coordinating conjunction, and how is it working? What is it connecting together?
I'm cold, but I did not put on a jacket. Is cold, but I did not put on. Like giving reason.
Okay.
I'm cold, but I did not.
What's it joining together first? Let's answer that.
Whether it's a coordinating conjunction or subordinating conjunction.
Yeah, this one's coordinating. We're just looking at examples of coordinating conjunctions right now.
Okay.
And I probably should have. Let me do this first. I should have mentioned this to you guys first. When we're talking about coordinating conjunctions, there are essentially just 5. All right, so these are should be easy to remember, and you can remember them by thinking of this acronym ANBOY. Okay, that doesn't mean anything, but just might be a way to help you remember. And this stands for and, nor, but, or, and yet. All right, those are essentially your coordinating conjunctions in English. Okay, so if you can remember these 5, then you can identify pretty quickly a coordinating conjunction within a sentence. And so in this case, but is part of, it's one of the 5 coordinating conjunctions. All right, and I highlighted it as well. Okay, and so each of these coordinating conjunctions have a different sort of way that they connect words, but all of them are connecting 2 grammatically equal words, phrases, or clauses. Okay, so in this case, an example that I asked Joshua to do here, that word but joins 2 independent clauses. It joins I am cold, and it joins I did not put on a jacket. Those are 2 complete thoughts. They're independent clauses. The word but serves as a contrast. In this case, I'm cold, but I didn't put on a jacket. Okay.
Mhm.
So, yeah, so far in this, we're just looking at examples of coordinating conjunctions. And so what we're looking for are these 5, because essentially those are the coordinating conjunctions in English. Now, subordinating conjunctions are going to be a little more difficult because there's a lot more of them, but at least coordinating ones we can identify if we just remember and boy, and, nor, but, or, yet. Okay? All right. Let me give you another example. Joshua, why don't you take this one on? Can you identify the coordinating conjunction and also tell us what the coordinating conjunction is linking in the sentence?
He ate bread and coordinating conjunction.
Okay. Good.
Meat and again coordinating conjunction. Eggs and yeah, another coordinating conjunction.
Okay. And what's the coordinating conjunction here? Actually, 3 of them. What are they linking together?
The object.
Good.
Right?
Yes. Yeah, actually, in this case, there's 4 objects, right? I should have. He ate bread and meat and eggs and fruit. So in this case, each of these, bread, meat, eggs, fruit, those are all objects. Those are all what he ate. They all are receiving the action. And so that coordinating conjunction is just linking those words, individual words, in this case, objects of the sentence. Again, grammatically equal. It's linking grammatically equal words. And all of them are functioning as the object in this particular sentence. Okay? Again, I stress grammatically equal. It's important to remember. All right, and is the conjunction, because again, we remember and boy, and nor, but, or, and yet. That's what we're looking for coordinating conjunctions, one of those 5. All right. Paul, I'm going to just have you do this one real quick. He was old yet healthy.
He was old. That is the independent clause.
Yes.
And the coordinating conjunction is yet, which connects the word to healthy. a noun.
Okay, and what is it connecting here? What is the coordinating conjunction connecting?
It's connecting a an independent clause to a noun. Yeah.
Well, again, remember, grammatically equal. So in this case,
It's describing the subject. Yeah, he was old and he's healthy.
yeah, it's linking those two words, right? Old and healthy together, which are in this sentence. Let me just pull up he was old yet healthy. It joins these two predicate adjectives, old and healthy. Okay? And yet has the idea sort of as a contrast. It's kind of like the word but. Normally you'll see the word but. Yet is less common. All right? Okay, so again, and boy. Think and boy, guys. Memorize this. And, nor, but, or, yet. You will see especially and, but, and, or used quite often. All right. So if you can just remember those, you'll be able to spot them in a paragraph right away. Okay. And this is how, with connector words, the process that I encourage you to do, especially, if you're still, learning, working at English, if you can go through, if you have a paragraph you're studying, is first just look through, do I see any coordinating conjunctions? All right. Because those are just 5 words I got to remember. And, nor, but, or, yet. And you'll probably find several of them just looking through. So you can just identify those as you go through. And then you go back through the paragraph and there'll be a certain set of prepositions I'm going to have you memorize. You'll look for those. And it's basically just a process of elimination as you go through. And as you get more familiar with these connector words, you'll see them more quickly. But at the beginning, just memorize and boy. All right. Start there. Look for those 5. And then come back and we'll look for some others. But that'll help you as you start. All right. And boy. And, or, but, or, yet. Okay. Now those are the coordinating conjunctions. Again, coordinating conjunctions join 2 grammatically equal words, phrases, or clauses. And that's what we saw in all the examples. Now, a little more complicated conjunction is the subordinating conjunction. We have we have the coordinating that carries the idea of joining, again, 2 grammatically equal words, phrases, or clauses. Okay, so you could join 2 independent clauses. You could join 2 objects. You could join, we saw in the last example, 2 predicate adjectives. You could join 2 verbs together, right? Another example might be, I ran and swam yesterday. Okay. This is another example of a coordinating conjunction. In this case, it's connecting the 2 verbs, ran and swam, and then yesterday is saying when I did those things. Okay? But ran and swam are linked together with the connector word. It's connecting the 2 verbs in this case. All right? Now, subordinating conjunction, it behaves a little differently. Coordinating brings together 2 things that are equal, 2 words, phrases, or clauses. A subordinating conjunction actually joins a dependent clause to the word it modifies. This idea of subordinate means to be of lower rank, lesser importance. Remember that. So subordinating conjunction introduces a clause that is dependent on something else in the sentence. That's why it's called a dependent clause. And that means it's subordinate to, it comes under another word in the sentence. Okay? I showed you that in the example up above when we were looking at Philemon. Right? I talked about when I remember you. Okay, that's subordinate to thank, meaning it comes under think. It's modifying that verb think. And this word when is actually the subordinating conjunction in that case. It's the conjunction introducing this dependent clause. We have another subordinating conjunction in this sentence, the word because. Okay, it is introducing a dependent clause which is linked to, subordinate to that verb think, and it's telling us why I think. All right. Now, this is extremely important to understand because when we're looking at a passage, you're trying to identify or follow or recognize what is the author focusing attention on. What is most important that the author is stating? And in this case, I thank my God is the independent clause. That's the important one. And he has two dependent clauses, when I remember you and because I hear of your love. Those come under the main clause of I thank my God always. And by understanding that Paul's using here subordinate conjunction idea, he is trying to show us the primary thought and then the subordinate or secondary thought. Okay? So I don't make emphasis on, I emphasize what Paul is emphasizing, what he is identifying as important. And I'll come back to this in a minute. But the subordinating conjunction is a conjunction that joins a dependent clause to the word it modifies. Okay, and again, subordinate gives us the idea that it's a subordinating idea. It's of lower rank or importance. And that doesn't mean it's unimportant. It's still inspired scripture, but there's an order to or degrees of importance in the paragraph that the author gives us. These subordinating conjunctions help us to see that. Okay. So let me just give you a few examples. Hold on a second. Let me first show you, and this will just be a representative list, not an exhaustive list, meaning here are some examples or a list of coordinating conjunctions that you will see in English. There are a number of other ones as well, but these are among the more common ones. All right. Now, unfortunately, with coordinating, we had just 5, right? And boy, and, nor, but, or, and yet. With subordinating, sorry, this should be subordinating conjunctions, the list is quite longer, all right? So it's probably not one you're going to necessarily memorize. You'll just have to get used to them as you work with them over time. But these are the more common ones: because, for, so that, in order that, if, when, as, how. These are ones you'll come across more commonly. Now, I will give you some links, links to websites that have a full list. Those will be in your notes. So you can go there and you can see a full list of subordinating conjunctions and have those available to you when you do your study. All right. Now let's look at some examples. I will play basketball while I am young. Okay, notice we have 2 clauses here. I will play basketball, and then the clause while I am young. All right, and that word while is a subordinating conjunction. It's a connector word. It's connecting I am young to I will play basketball. All right, and here, but it's subordinating. So I am young it's not saying I will play basketball and I am young. That's not what he said. These would be two independent clauses then, right? Because coordinating connects two grammatically equal words, phrases, or clauses. So if I had said, I will play basketball and I am young, that's a coordinating conjunction, bringing together two, connects two independent clauses. These would be two statements of equal importance. All right, but that's not the sentence. The sentence is, I will play basketball while I am young. So I am young is a subordinate clause, subordinate idea. This is how I would diagram it. I will play basketball. When will I play basketball? While I am young. Okay, so again, the main thought is I will play basketball. The subordinate idea or subordinate clause is while I am young. It's modifying will play. Okay, while is the subordinating conjunction here. Okay, does this concept of subordinate make sense to you? This is super important when we do interpretation in scripture. We have to understand what are the subordinating ideas and what are the primary ideas being expressed. And these subordinating conjunctions are very helpful because they tell us what's being introduced here, while I am young, is a subordinate clause. It is coming under, modifying something else in the sentence. Okay? And that's a big difference between that and a coordinating conjunction. A coordinating conjunction brings together two equal words, phrases, or clauses. All right? So if we were preaching, if I could say it that way, if we were preaching this sentence in the first case, if we say, I will play basketball and I am young, how many outline points would I have in my sermon? There's two, right? Two main points. I will play basketball. And then the second point, I am young. But in this second sentence with a subordinating conjunction, there is one main point. I will play basketball. While I am young is a subordinate thought that tells the person when I will play basketball. All right, but it's not two separate independent thoughts like the sentence up here is. It's one independent thought with a modifying statement that gives clarity to when I will play basketball. All right, so that's why I'm going over this fact that there's two kinds of conjunctions. One's a coordinating, one's a subordinating. All right, let's look at another example. I prayed fervently because she was in the hospital. Now again, because is my subordinating conjunction. Okay, I know it's not coordinating because it's not one of the and boy, right? It's not and, nor, but, or, yet. Okay, I know I know that it's not one of these, so it must be subordinating. So it is introducing this clause, she was in the hospital. It's introducing that clause, and that clause will be subordinate. It will come under, it will modify something else in the sentence. And this is how I have it diagrammed. I prayed fervently. That's the main idea. That's the main thought. Notice again, we have this is an independent clause. We have the subject. We have the verb here. And fervently actually is an adverb. It's describing how I prayed. So technically, I would probably put it under here. Okay? Because it's modifying prayed. It's describing how I prayed. But I want you to focus attention on there's a subordinating conjunction here, because, and that word because carries the idea of a reason, why. In this case, why I prayed. I prayed because she was in the hospital. Now again, notice I have a dependent clause here, right? She is the verb subject and the verb is was, so that's a clause, but this clause is not an independent statement. It's not an independent clause. It's dependent. That word because tells us that. All right. Okay. Fu Wei, I'm going to give this one to you. I've identified the subordinating conjunction for you. I've highlighted it. Can you just tell us what it's doing there? What clause it's introducing and how it's connected? You want to try to do that for us?
Okay. Keep fishing even if you are run out of times. Okay, so there is a conjunction, it's a even if. So it's mentioned about you keep preaching means you do the works, even if like connecting, showing that you even you are run out of time is I think is interpret uh interpret the conditions like what. Yeah.
Okay, good. You run out of time. Is that a clause? Remember, a clause has a subject and a verb. Do we see that here? You run out of time. Do we see a subject and verb there?
Yes.
Yes, we do. Okay, so we have a clause here. So even if is introducing this clause, right? As you were describing. And so here's how I would think this is what I will keep preaching. Okay, that's the action. And I will do this even if you run out of time. All right, I think I meant to say if I run out of time. Sorry about that. Okay, so I run out of time is a clause, but it doesn't stand alone. It's dependent. It's dependent on the action I will keep preaching. And the connection is this subordinating conjunction, even if. All right, it's describing what we call a concession, meaning I will keep doing this action even though something else happens. Okay, in this case. So I just want you guys to see I run out of time is the dependent clause, and it's dependent because it's being introduced by this subordinating conjunction. All right. Okay. Thank you. Let me do another example here. Pastor Philip, can you tell us about this particular sentence? I've highlighted the subordinating conjunction.
Yes, they walk to the store is an independent clause, and
good.
buy food is a dependent clause.
Okay.
And buy food is a subordinate clause because it has subordinate conjunction in order to.
Good. And in order to is a reason, right?
Yes.
Tells us why they walked to the store in order to buy food. Okay, so it's describing in order to buy food is not the main action. It's a subordinate action, a subordinate clause that modifies the main action, which is walked. It tells us why they walked to the store. All right. Okay, good. Here, I'll just do this one real quick. The lights will stay on. Okay, that is my independent clause. Subject is lights, will stay on is the verb. And then unless we have a brownout. Now we have a brownout is another clause, and it's connected by that word unless, which is a subordinating conjunction. It tells us the condition. The lights will stay on, and there's a condition. They'll only stay on, or they'll continue to stay on unless there's a brownout, unless there's a power outage, okay? Again, unless is another type of subordinating conjunction. It's not coordinating because it's not and, nor, but, or, yet, all right? So it's not one of those five, so it must be subordinating, okay? And then finally, he was happy when he saw his, actually, that's his grandson. That's Tagalog, a Tagalog word. Apo means grandchild. But he was happy, and then notice, again, when tells us it's a subordinating conjunction telling us when he was happy. When he saw his grandson. All right. So there's a long list of subordinating conjunctions. All right. Now the way that you can tell you have a subordinating conjunction is two things. One is, so how do I know if I have a subordinating conjunction? Two ways. One, if it is not part of amboy, okay? If it's not one of the five coordinating conjunctions, that's one step. The second is if it is followed by a clause, okay? And this will matter later when we look at words like prepositions. Prepositions are followed, are not followed by a clause. They're followed by a noun. All right. And so in this case, if that word is followed by a clause, he, subject, verb, saw, I know that I have a subordinating conjunction. Okay, because it's not amboy and it's followed by a clause. Those are the two things to look for. We'll talk more about that as we do more examples later. Okay, so let me come back to this important distinction between the subordinating and coordinating conjunction and why it's significant for understanding when you're studying a passage, okay? Let's look at these two sentences here below. Both are very, very similar. There's only one word, actually, that's different between them. All right, do you see the different word? The first sentence, she came to church and she heard the sermon. The next sentence is exactly the same except for one word. She came to church, so she heard the sermon. Or we could say maybe clearer, so that she heard the sermon. Okay? So basically, these sentences are almost exactly the same except for that one minor difference. But that one minor difference is very significant in interpreting what the author is communicating here, okay? The first sentence joins two independent clauses of equal importance, right? It gives two actions carried out by the subject. She came to church and she heard the sermon. When it's worded this way, the author is giving equal importance to both actions, all right? But the second sentence, she came to church, and then the word so that is a subordinating conjunction, not coordinating. It's subordinating, and in this case, it tells us what the result. She came to church, and what resulted is she heard the sermon. Okay, now this is giving us a similar thought in that we're seeing both the idea of she came to church and that she heard the sermon. The first sentence, though, tells us those are two actions of equal importance. The second sentence tells us that the more important statement is she came to church. That's what the author is emphasizing here. She came to church. The second clause gives us the result. Essentially, because she came to church, she heard the sermon. All right, she came to church so that she heard the sermon. So as I told you in an example earlier, if we were discussing, explaining or teaching this statement, we would have, in this case, in the first sentence, we would have two main points. Okay, this would be point number 1, and this would be the main point number 2. But in this second example, there's just one point. And this, so that she heard the sermon, is subordinate to that main point. Okay? This is very important that we see this. I'll show you some examples as we go further in the course on why this is significant in preaching. Well, here, I'll show you one right now. It doesn't use a coordinating conjunction, but it'll still express the same. Let's go back to our passage from our Lord on the Great Commission. Okay. Now, let's focus in on the command, right? The second point that Jesus was making. Make disciples of all the nations. That's the main statement. That's an independent clause. The subject is you. It's implied here because it's a command. The verb is make disciples. Okay? And then all the nations is the nations is the object. All right? Now, notice, in this case, we don't have a subordinating conjunction. We have what's called a participle, but it is a connector word that introduces a subordinate idea. And so notice he says here, make disciples of all the nations, baptizing them and teaching them. So if you were to preach this text, you would preach the second point being make disciples of all the nations. And then you would describe, that's the main idea. That's the key command. Then Jesus says how to do that. What does it mean to make disciples? Well, Jesus explains that with two subordinating ideas. One is baptizing, 2 is teaching. These are subpoints. They're not main points. The main point, the focus from Jesus is make disciples. Okay? Now, what if he had said this? What if he had said, make disciples and baptize and teach them? Okay, what if he did not use that participle, baptizing? Let me put that. This is what Jesus did say. Make disciples, baptizing them and teaching them. Okay, that's what Jesus did say. But what if he had said, and baptize and teach? What if he had used like regular verbs, not participles? Then we would have to teach. Jesus was making 3 separate points. Make disciples, baptize, teach. Those would be 3 different actions because he was using coordinating conjunction and these finite verbs. But he didn't. He used a participle, which, as we'll discuss in a couple of weeks, a participle is a subordinating kind of verb. All right, it's not a main verb, it's subordinate. It's just like a subordinating conjunction. It has a similar idea. So in this case, really, it's one main point, make disciples, and then baptizing and teaching are saying how to do that. All right, so these, just by using this participle, it gives us guidance and direction as to what Jesus is emphasizing and what he's actually saying. Like I said, in this case, those two tell us how to make disciples. But in this second example, if this is what Jesus said, he would be making three separate statements. He would be saying, 1, make disciples. 2, baptize them. 3, teach them. Those are three different actions. But by using these participles, he's actually one main action, make disciples, and then these participles are subordinate to that action. Okay? Again, these aren't subordinating conjunctions, but it's the same concept, the same idea. So if we go back to these examples I was giving you of subordinating conjunctions, that's not it. She came to church so that she heard the sermon. It's a similar concept. It's a subordinating conjunction, so it's coming under the main point, which is she came to church. But if I had used a coordinating conjunction, I would be giving 2 main points. Questions on that? I'm repeating this quite a bit because it's really an important concept in the process of exegesis. So are there any questions on this idea of subordinate and why that's different than a coordinating conjunction?
Yeah, a coordinate point. I mean, the coordinating, they are 2 equally important points. Give us the idea that they are not like connected or related to each other, whereas the subordinating conjunction help us to see the subordinating conjunction, that clause explain the main point further or give you more information about what the point is teaching. So yeah, I think that's helpful.
Yeah, that's a good way to express it. You're exactly right. It gives us more information in support of the main point. Yeah, that's good. I like that. Let me write that down. So we see the subordinating in this case clause, right, gives us more information about the main clause in this case. Okay. Whereas the coordinating conjunction is giving us equal information, so to speak. All right. And we're going to come back to this over and over again, because again, in the diagram, as I've shown you with the Great Commission example, you have all of these phrases, these participle phrase, these phrases that I'm highlighting here, all of those are subordinate. They all come under this main clause. Okay, so all of these things here are not main ideas. They are supporting. They're giving more information to the main idea. Okay, same here, in heaven and on earth. Those aren't main ideas. You're not going to preach a sermon about heaven and earth from this passage, because that's not what Jesus is talking about here. The main point is all authority has been given to me. And here he identifies the locations where that main authority is given. Those are supporting ideas, adding more information to the main idea. All right, but don't Don't reverse the order here. Don't focus attention on a minor point. Rather, focus on the major point and then show how the minor points connect to that major point. That's what exactly is here. In this example, we have three major points: his declaration, his command, and his promise. And then under the second major point, we have two minor points, or two subpoints: baptizing and teaching. Now, again, I'm just to repeat, that doesn't mean baptizing and teaching are not important. I mean, they're very important, right? But as far as in this particular sentence, the primary point is Jesus's command to make disciples. And then these two subpoints indicate how we are to do that. It's really describing how to make a disciple. We baptize them, we bring them to Christ, and then teaching them, we grow them in Christ. Salvation, sanctification. All right? But those come under the focal point, which is make disciples. Jesus has commanded us to do what he calls make disciples, to identify, to preach the gospel, and to instruct those who would be followers of Jesus Christ. Okay? All right. Well, there's an expression here, beating a dead horse. So I think hopefully I've made that that idea clear. Now, here's a list of coordinating conjunctions. Pastor Philip also mentioned there is an acronym you could remember called WABITS instead of rabbits, WABITS, which these are some of the more common subordinating conjunctions. But again, there's quite a list. But if you want to memorize a few, just to, again, a few of the more common ones, here are some to consider, okay? But notice here I have a more full list, and I'll give you, do I do that here? In your notes, I'll have a link to, oh, I think I actually showed it up here. Let me just go back real quick. I believe I showed a link. Yeah. Notice here, and these will be in your notes, I have a link here to a list of conjunctions that you can go look up and have as a resource, okay? And I'll give you more links as we go through these connector words so you can have some resources to get more information, more details, okay? All right, but yeah, if you want to consider WABITS, that might be a helpful acronym. When, where, while, and then after, because, before, if, though, and since. Okay, again, those aren't all the connector words.
There's a typo, Tim.
Typo. Where?
Is it not coordinating, right? This
Oh.
is not coordinating.
Thank you. Sorry about that. Thank you.
No problem.
Yeah, the coordinating, right? The list of coordinating is simple. It's just those 5. And, but, and, nor, but, or, and yet. Okay? And boy. All right. Let's see. How are we doing? Okay. Let's do a couple of examples here. And I'll have you guys help with this, and then we'll end for tonight. So I'll do one example, and then I'll call on you guys to what I want you to do for this is I have some sentences here, and I just want you to identify each conjunction in the sentence. There could be more than one. Indicate, is it a coordinate conjunction or subordinate? And then we'll talk about how that conjunction functions in the sentence. So for example, During the service, we prayed and sang and heard a sermon. So here we have two conjunctions, the word and I remember from my and boy, right? And, nor, but, or, yet, that these are coordinating, the word and. And in this case, they're linking the verbs, prayed, sang, and heard. Okay? All right. Zhao Li, I'm going to have you, ask you if you wouldn't mind doing this next one here. Can you identify any conjunctions here and then tell us what kind of conjunction it is?
When is conjunction, I'm sure, and
Yes.
then could be to. Not really. Yes.
Okay. And what kind of conjunction is when?
It's subordinating
Okay, good. How do we know that?
because it's not and boy.
Very good. Very good. All right. And it's connecting. He read the passage to listen. It's telling us when we listened, right?
Yes.
Now, you had mentioned this too as a possibility. What would we need to check to know if it's a conjunction or not? I gave two things to look for. One is amboy, which it's not. The second was, is it followed by a clause?
Okay. Yeah.
Is Pastor Joshua a clause?
Nope.
It's not. How do you know that?
Because it's a pronoun.
Yeah, it's just a noun, right? There is no verb.
No verb. Yes.
Okay, so we know that to is actually not a subordinating conjunction. As it turns out, we'll learn later, to is a preposition. So it is a connector word. So you were right to think about it as it is a connector word. It's just not a conjunction. It's a different kind of connector word. All
Okay.
right. All right, very good. So if I were to diagram this, I would have it this way. Because it's subordinating conjunction, I would put it under listened, because it's telling us when we listened. Okay, it's subordinate. Excellent job. You did so good, I'm going to give you one more.
Okay.
How about this sentence?
Because is the conjunction and it's kind of subordinated conjunction.
Yes, very good. And so, and we know that one, it's not amboy,
Yes.
and two, it is followed by a clause. They, subject, look, the verb. Okay?
Okay.
So it meets those two conditions. Now Zhao Li, how is this, because how is it connecting? How's it working in this sentence? What is it doing? Or maybe let me ask it another way. It's introducing this dependent clause. How is it linking this dependent clause to the sentence? What word is it connected to, you think?
It's connected to enjoy or
Yes.
enjoy marvel.
Very good. So it's connected to enjoys. It's telling us why my wife enjoys flowers, because they look beautiful. So I put it under that verb.
Yes.
Okay. And again, notice it's under the verb. It's subordinate. It's a subordinating conjunction telling us why. All right. Excellent job. Kaptup, I'm gonna give you this sentence. Just tell us, what conjunctions do you see first?
Do you want rice or bread or both? Yes. Or is conjunction.
Good. And what kind of conjunction is it? Is it subordinating or coordinating?
Yes. It is coordinating conjunction.
Yes. Because, how do you know that?
Yes. It is grammatically equal.
Okay, good. Yeah, it's first, it's part of amboy, right? It's one of these, and, nor, but, or, there it is, yet. So we know it's coordinating conjunction. And then yes, what words is it connecting?
Connecting. Connect. Do you want? Oh,
You said it earlier.
do you want rice is a close.
It's giving us options, right? Do you want rice or bread or both?
Both.
Okay, so we would show it that way. It's connecting rice, bread, and both all together, giving us those three options. All right, and it's coordinating, so these are all equal in grammatically equal. Do you want rice? Do you want bread? Do you want both? Okay, and again, they're coordinating. It's part of and boy. All right, let me give you one more, Kaptup. This one. He hurt his foot, but he was still able to walk home. Can you see a conjunction there?
But is conjunction.
Very good. What kind?
But coordinating conjunction.
Yeah, good. Again, it's one of the and boy, isn't it? So it's coordinating. Now, question is, and we know it's a conjunction as well, all right? Because it's coordinating conjunction because it's one of the five, and, nor, but, or, yet. Now, the question is, how is this working? How is it functioning here? But is a contrast word, right? It contrasts two things. What's being contrasted here? What do you think?
I have no idea.
Okay, no problem. So we have he hurt his foot, but he was still able to walk home. So it's contrasting these two independent clauses. Okay, and this is how we would diagram it. He hurt his foot is one statement. He was still able to walk home is the other, and but is contrasting those two. So we would say, but contrasts the two independent clauses. Okay? But it's good. You noticed and identified it as a coordinating conjunction. which is really important. And just remembering that it's one of those 5. So if you guys, again, memorize and boy, that will really help you to see right away. So thank you, Kaptup. Good job. Paul, let me have you do this one. Do the next couple.
They will stay at my house until the prayer meeting ends. Until is the subordinating conjunction.
Okay. And how do you know that? It's a subordinating conjunction. What are the two?
Well, they'll stay at my house is the independent clause, and the prayer meeting ends is a dependent clause.
Yeah, the prayer meeting is a clause here, right? The meeting is subject, the verb is ends. So I know I have a clause here. So this word introducing the clause must be a subordinating conjunction. All right, and how is it functioning here, Paul? That word until, what does that word mean? How is it connecting this clause?
It has to do with time or how long they will stay at the house.
So what word do you think it modifies?
Stay.
Yeah.
I think that.
Good. Because it's telling how long they will stay. Or when, we could say. So again, it's a dependent clause because I got a subject and a verb, a meeting and ends, and until is subordinating that clause under stay. It's because it's telling how long they will stay at my house. All right, let me give you another one, Paul.
Although our time together was short, we became good friends. Although is the subordinating conjunction.
Okay, good. What's the independent clause in this sentence?
We became good friends.
Yes. And notice it doesn't begin the sentence, does it? It actually is later in the sentence.
Mm-hmm.
That's the independent clause. So in this case, we have an example of the dependent clause coming before the independent clause. And we will see this in Scripture. And we know this is a dependent clause because it's being introduced by a subordinating conjunction, although, which by the way is part of, Wabbits. If you, or no, that's after actually. Sorry. So how would I diagram this one? What word do you think is this clause is modifying, Paul?
It is although our time together. It's a concession that, because the word though, right? It's a although our time together was short. I think I'll put it under the word short. Yeah.
So like,
because it's a yeah.
So like this, you'd have it indented next to short. Is that what you're saying?
Doesn't look right somehow,
Right.
Although our time together was short, I think maybe we'll put time then, time together. Yeah. No,
So
time
like
together.
this. These are a little tougher. Let me just show you what I would do, and then
we became good friends.
it's modifying the action. Okay, you're correct in saying it's a concession, meaning we will concede that this act, although our time together was short, we still became friends. So we became friends is the main idea, and this although provides a concession that modifies the action, or in this case the verb became. All right, I'll this example come up later, so I just wanted to see if give you some, see if you could think about how this might connect. The key thing I want you guys to see is that although is a subordinating conjunction, and in this case it came before the independent clause. All the other examples I gave you, the conjunction was coming after the independent clause, but sometimes we will see it before. Another example might be during the meeting, Paul fell asleep. Okay. This is actually during, let's see, during, or let's do this. When the man spoke, I'll do it that way, that's a little easier. Paul fell asleep. Okay, Paul fell asleep is my independent clause. When is a subordinating conjunction, and it's introducing this clause, the man spoke. And in this case, it's another example of a sentence beginning with the dependent clause. And we know it's dependent because of that word when. And when I diagram something like this, I still follow the word order, but I indent it above the word it modifies. In this case, fell. All right, let me give you guys one more. We're actually over time already, and then I'll let you go for tonight. I'll go ahead and do this one. In this case, I've got a conjunction and I have a conjunction in order to. All right, I have two different conjunctions here, and the first conjunction and is let's see, coordinating conjunction is and because it's part of amboy, and subordinating conjunction in order to. Okay, and this is how I would connect them together, because he visited the Lees and the Carnes. All right, those are both objects. And then in order to is the reason that he visited. So I would put that under visited. Okay, so and connects the two objects, which are the Lees and the Carnes. And then in order to tells the reason he visited. Okay. All right. Now let me make one comment and then I'll let you guys go. Paul mentions, here's a link that he identified that discusses subordinating and coordinating conjunctions. I haven't checked that one out, but you can take a look there. One thing to be aware of, and you might see this in some of the things you look at, is some might say coordinating conjunction. And this is, and they would say instead of and boy, they would say fanboys. All right. But be careful. Actually, that is from a very old, back about 70, 80 years ago, someone came up with this acronym, and actually it's not quite accurate because the F is for and the S is for so. And if you study the English language, those are actually subordinating conjunctions. So keep that in mind. All right. ANBOY is actually a better acronym, more accurate acronym. Okay. But there's another link to consider. I'll check it out and then I'll stick it in your notes if that will be helpful to you. All right. Well, thank you for your patience and staying on a little bit longer. Today, again, I know this is a pretty technical in some regards, and I just would ask that you stay with it, endure. If something isn't making sense right now, just keep with this, and I think it'll make sense as we continue going forward. All right. I'll try to repeat a lot. Of course, I'm recording these sessions so that you can revisit these. I'll send you the notes. So hopefully all of that together, just keep reviewing and looking at the different examples I give you. Next week, we'll continue this discussion on conjunctions. We'll look at some passages in scripture together, see how they're being used there. But as you better understand how these connector words work, it will allow you to more easily identify how all the phrases and clauses fit together within a sentence, and will help you interpret a passage much more accurately and clearly. But it'll take some effort for us to get there, okay? All right. Well, that was quite a bit. Again, I hope that helped you a little bit with that. Any final questions before we close the evening together? All right. Dwayne, if you're there, would you mind closing us in prayer? Would you be able to do that?
Okay, Lord, we rejoice in these privileges to get these tidbits of truth. Lord, will help us to be more accurate in